Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, one of the guys that I admire a lot is Mahatma Gandhi. He once said that the easiest way for you to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. All of the stars that we're honoring here today and the people that has put this event together are those that believe in service to humanity. Our next speaker totally believes that. He is a Kenyan American professor of law, all the way from New York, but in Africa we call him the son of the soil. I'd like to welcome here Professor Makau Mutwa, who will be stepping forward to make a few remarks. The former Prime Minister is here, and so whatever you say, you'll be marked. I welcome you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Mr. Osinbajo, a senior member of the bar and a colleague, Your Excellency, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, the former Prime Minister of Kenya. I would like to thank the Leadership Forum Group for putting up this wonderful event. As I was coming up here, I realized that there's a reason as to why Nigeria is called the giant of Africa. You can throw a party. But let me say, and seek the forbearance of the Vice President and the former Prime Minister, who are very strong Pan-Africanists, because I'm going to quote Winston Churchill, a person I don't always like to quote. And I like to quote two things that he said. The first one was that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. Meaning that democracy is not perfect, but still it is the best form of government. The second thing that he said was that the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. Meaning that sometimes voters can get it wrong for a number of reasons. And I say this because I think today we are reflecting on democracy. And democracy, as we all know, is an experiment. It is not a destination. Democracy pivots on two basic tenets of liberalism. The first tenet is that of formal equality. Formal equality. The second tenet is that of abstract autonomy. Abstract autonomy. Formal equality refers to the relationship between one person and another and speaks to the inherent dignity in the human person. Abstract autonomy refers to the fact that we own ourselves, that no one owns us. We as human beings own ourselves. And this means that we have the sovereignty of personhood and the sovereignty of reason. It is because of these two tenets that democracy is not possible. But you realize that I talked about formal equality and abstract autonomy. I did not talk about substantive equality or substantive autonomy. This means that in the democratic experiment, we use formal equality and abstract autonomy as a springboard for democracy when we give them substance. Meaning that the institutions of government must empower people to have and to create substance in terms of equality and substance in terms of autonomy. And I say this because of a trend that we have seen in Africa and elsewhere in the world, whereby those notions on which democracy pivots, equality and autonomy, have been subverted. And they have been subverted by populist authoritarians. And by populist authoritarians, I'm referring to individuals who manipulate and seize institutions and structures of democracy to subvert democracy, meaning that they speak the language of democracy, they speak the language of liberalism, and they speak the language of the rule of law, but they don't mean it. They speak that language to seize power, to subvert the will of the people. And I think this is something that in Africa we have to think about very seriously, because we in Kenya have just recently experienced what I've just described, where a political party and an individual who claimed to speak the language of democracy and the language of human rights and the language of a bottom-up philosophy was able to work in cahoots with domestic cartels, with international interests, and to use technology to subvert the will of the people. As you all know, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, who is your guest today, competed in those elections. And I don't think it would be fair for us to sweep what happened under the carpet. So permit me 2 more minutes to just describe something to you. So we went to elections in Kenya after a long campaign period. We have in Kenya an organization called the IEBC, the Electoral Commission, the Independent Elections and Boundaries Commission, which is whose purpose is to conduct elections in Kenya. That body was supposed to be independent, but several things happened. The members of that commission, working in cahoots with the interests I just described, were able to subvert the election of August the 9th, 2022. I want to say that Mr. Odinga and others in the Azimio party were willing to concede the election if the election was free and fair. But what is your obligation as a citizen of Africa if you know that an election has been stolen? What is your obligation to the people of that country, to Africa, and to the notion of democracy? Luckily for us, a couple of weeks ago, a whistleblower from the IEBC, the electoral body, came forward and provided authentic statistics about the outcome of that election. I don't know whether you know this, but Mr. Odinga won that election by over 2.5 million votes. Currently, we are asking Kenyans to think about what they should do about that. Because if nothing is done, if we cannot stop electoral theft, then there will be no reason for you to go out and cast your ballot in the next election. And democracy will die in darkness in that particular case. I just want to say several things here. Number one, that Africans must think carefully about the use of technology in conducting elections. Because we've seen in Kenya how technology could be manipulated to subvert the will of the people. The second thing I would like to say is that Africans must be very careful about the interference of their election and their electoral processes by foreign powers. I know that Mr. Odinga is going to talk generally about elections in transition and their effect on the economy, but I thought it would be a disservice to Africa's giant if I did not ring this bell to you, because you are very soon going to go to an election and you'll have to think about how free and fair that election is going to be in view of Kenya's experience. So I'd like to say thank you very much. I'd like to thank everyone, and I would like to wish all of us a wonderful conference. Thank you so much.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, next to speak to us is our very special guest, a politician, former member of the parliament for Langata constituency in Kenya, former prime minister, the authentic leader of the opposition in Kenya, and he remains a dogged fighter for democracy. It is our pleasure here now to welcome His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga.
You may be seated. Your Excellency, Professor Yemi Osinbanjo, the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Mrs. Zainab Nda Isaya, Group Chairman of the Leadership Media Group, Mr. Azubuike Shekwene, Senior Vice Chairman and Editor-in-Chief, Mr. Mike Opere, Group Vice Chairman, diplomats, distinguished guests, all protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I feel very delighted to stand before you this morning in order to have a discussion with you about a subject that is of great importance to the peoples of Africa. I'm standing here in Nigeria, very much aware that out of every 5 working black men in the world, one of them is a Nigerian. So Nigeria, therefore, is the giant on our continent. And they say that when Nigeria coughs, the other part of Africa catch colds. So I'm honored to be speaking to you at this distinguished forum on a subject of credible elections and economies in transition. I was invited at this time. I don't know whether I was the right person to talk about this subject today, but I'm going to try my best not to disappoint. This discussion comes at a time we are grappling with this same matter back home in Kenya, following our last elections last year. Professor Makau has shared with you certain issues, but I don't want to go in that direction. Back home, I have expressed fears that if we do not comprehensively and credibly address the issue of credibility of this election outcome last year, the virus will spread and affect the upcoming elections on the continent. More immediately, Kenyans may lose all faith and decide to boycott future elections because they will believe their votes do not matter. Kenya has become a laboratory for bad election practices that others borrow around the continent. You may recall that our malpractices of 2007 quickly became the script for Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. Since then, more of our neighbors have followed suit and perfected the use of technology to override the will of the people, the voters. As a Pan-Africanist and as an Afro-optimist, I fully subscribe to and support Africa's Agenda 2063, which seeks the socio-economic transformation of the continent. And I'm also a student of late Kwame Nkrumah, who said that Africa must unite in order to progress. But I want to send a red flag at this forum. If I want to achieve the goals of Agenda 2063, then we must prioritize and entrench free, fair, and credible elections by all member states. Since the reintroduction of multi-party politics in the 1990s, the quality and credibility of our elections have steadily deteriorated. You remember the struggle for democratization of the continent, from the independence in the 60s to the 70s, 80s. Africans were struggling because the period after independence, most multi-party systems were discarded and single-party dictatorships took root, followed by military coups that took place in the continent. The Africans were struggling to open up the democratic space. It was not until the fall of the Berlin Wall and that the wind of change that began to blow in the Eastern Europe fought its way into our continent. The military dictatorships then crumbled, and single-party dictatorships and gave way to multi-party elections. In many of our countries today, election management bodies have been captured by the ruling parties or individual politicians, making it impossible to have fair contests. The capture leads to skewed processes like voter registration, appointment of election management officials with disastrous consequences. As a continent, we have to agree that critical development efforts cannot succeed without a legitimate and democratically elected government that is responsive and accountable to its citizens and to the investor community. Free and fair elections are indicators to investors that there is the government which is in place that believes in fairness and the rule of law. When a government comes in through a fair ballot, investors get the reassurance that their property will be respected, taxation will be fair, investment rules will be simple and clear, and they will not have to resort to corruption and bribery to set up or stay in business. Illiberal regimes send signals that are direct opposite of what investors are looking for. Professor Mike touched on Boise State University in the US wrote, and I quote, "Many investors conclude that governments that violate electoral laws to stay in office would also be willing to violate investors' property rights. If the election was rigged and the leader is overriding laws and constitutional provisions, no one in the country can stand up to the government. And so investment falls because there's a lot of economic risk in doing business in countries with unconstrained governments, unquote. Regimes that come to power by rigged elections cannot guarantee judicial independence and other state and non-governmental bodies that are critical to the rule of law, which is an indispensable requirement for a good investment climate. We therefore need to internalize the fact that elections are important political risk assessment tools for investors. Investors look at how elections are being conducted before they can risk their investment in that environment. I must hasten to add here that by investors, I'm not simply talking about foreign investment. I refer also, most importantly, to domestic investors. Africa has seen swings in fortunes before, from bad to better and back to worse. Much, if not all of those swings, have resulted from elections that fail to meet the minimum standards for free elections. In other cases, there are no elections at all. In the mid-1990s, Africa was very hopeful following the introduction of multi-party politics on the continent. Our leaders and intellectuals proclaimed an African renaissance. The grim days of post-colonial Africa were declared over. The Cold War, too, was over, and with it, the misrule and dictatorships perpetuated by military rulers, big men, and presidents for life. I recall in 1994, our very own President Nelson Mandela, Madiba, declared, and I quote, "Africa cries out for a new birth. We must, in action, say that there's no obstacle big enough to stop us from bringing about a new African renaissance," unquote. I recall then when President Bill Clinton set out on a six-nation visit to Africa in 1998, his destination was the countries that were seen to be shepherding this renaissance. The nations were also viewed to have a new generation of leaders that would protect and champion the ideals of democracy and economic prosperity. Ghana, Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa, Botswana, and Senegal, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Mali, Democratic Republic of Congo, then under President Laurent Kabila, were among them. Ahead of the President Clinton's visit, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright proclaimed, I quote, "The era of the big man who comes to power, stays for life, and robs his country blind is over," unquote. Unfortunately, she spoke too soon. We now know that the era was not over. We also know that the fortunes of the countries that were seen to be shepherding the Renaissance have swung back and forth over the past several decades, and some are worse off today. In a number of cases, those who are lauded as a new generation of African leaders have become a new generation of African strongmen and tyrants. They preside over de facto one-party states that do not allow for self-government and have not established mechanisms for peaceful transfer of power. Without that guarantee, the growth we see in some of those countries today and the stability the authoritarian regimes seem to have enforced are sure to collapse at some stage, and those countries will have to begin afresh. Elections and democracy are failing in Africa, not because a majority of African voters prefer authoritarianism, non-democratic forms of government. It is happening because an organized elite keen to protect narrow selfish interests has forged strategic alliances and captured strategic systems and institutions of various nations with the sole purpose of subverting the substance of elections. In a number of countries, we are witnessing a situation in which the majority is increasingly at the mercy of the minority with regard to free, fair, transparent, and credible elections. Africans who wake up at dawn, stand in long queues all day to cast their ballot, end up with the results that indicate their voters were not counted and did not count. In the last decade, many of our nations have evolved modern systems for collection, coalition, transmission, and tallying of election results. Many have adopted a result management systems that combine traditional vote counting and tallying processes and the use of technology to verify voter eligibility, register voters, and transmit results. In addition, we have seen the evolution of the electoral laws to allow representatives of political parties to independently tally the results and transmit to party tallying centers. But as we have witnessed in Kenya both in 2017 and 2022, technology is getting compromised and results altered. This has severely damaged the credibility of election management bodies in many of our countries. Let us cite an example. According to Gallup poll, 64% of Kenyans did not have the confidence in the honesty of elections as we prepared for the 2022 elections. Similarly, the Afrobarometer survey shows that 24% of Kenyans thought that the elections are not at all free and fair. A further 18% thought that elections may be free and fair, but there are major problems. Only 23% of Kenyans thought that elections are completely free and fair as we headed to the polls. The Afrobarometer survey further showed that 31% of Kenyans did not trust our election management body, the IEBC, at all, and 23% trusted it only a little. Only 19% trusted the IEBC a lot. According to the Gallup poll, the percentage of Kenyans who have confidence in the honesty of elections declined from 58% in 2015 to only 35% in 2021. I believe the picture is pretty much the same in many African countries. Existing electoral laws are not seen to assemble an electoral system that the people believe is transparent, accountable, and democratic. There is therefore need for further reforms to make the voting process more accessible and reliable, enhance protections against mistakes, irregularity, confusion, and fraud. There is need to rethink the use of technology. Either we adopt a reliable election technology, including voting machines, and generate a voter verifiable audit trail, so voters can confirm that their choices are being recorded accurately, or we go fully manual. In Kenya, the Supreme Court ruled that the technology used by the IEBC in the 2022 election met the constitutional standards of integrity, verifiability, security, and transparency. It is unclear on what the objective criteria the Supreme Court arrived at this conclusion. There is also the question of centralization of election management. Do we need one big electoral body to manage our elections, or should election management be devolved to the states, the regions, or counties, as in the case of the United States? Should parties be allowed to second their members to the election management bodies? My answer to these two questions is yes. Here's my call to action. If Africa's elite autocrats are uniting against free and fair elections, Africa's democrats must also unite and defend democracy. We must build a continent-wide democracy coalition and look out for each other. The continent's democrats must treat the subversion of election anywhere on the continent as subversion of the people's will everywhere on the continent. It should be clear in the word and deed that whoever makes a move to ascend to power by means other than credible and constitutional elections is not only condemned, but subjected to sanctions and removal from such office. So far, the trend has been that an election malpractice that goes unpunished in one country provides a script for another country and then becomes the new normal. I will not go into details of my own country, Kenya, and the critics brewing there because of an election that was compromised in August last year. But Kenya's case must sound a warning to all. I am not a stranger to Nigeria. In fact, some other places they tell me that I'm a Nigerian. At one time I was arrested in Lagos when I was observing an election in 2003. And I was told, don't you know that today people are not supposed to be driving? The driver told him, I'm carrying an oga. Then when they looked, there was, of course, we had a sticker. Then he came and looked at me and said, who are you? I said, yes, I'm an observer. You are Nigerian? I said, no, I'm not a Nigerian. Come on, man, don't play around with us. You are Nigerian. Eventually, when I showed my passport, then I realized I was not a Nigerian. But I'm saying that look, Nigeria has gone through very trying moments in our history. I remember the struggle for independence. I remember Zik. And I remember Awolo. Those were involved. The Sayoduna was secretary. I remember Tafawa Balewa period. I remember the coming of Ironzi, the transition from civilian to military. I remember Yakub Gowon. And then I remember General Murtala Mohammed. I remember, of course, Baba Basanjo. Then the first transition to civilian. Then came the Shagari period, first Bambanginda, then the Butcher of Abuja, the Nabi Salam. Then I was here in the campaign of 1999. I was with Baba Basanjo and Falai, professor. I traveled around the country. I was here in Abuja, Nasarawa, Jos, Kano, Enugu, Anambra, down Port Harcourt. I was in Lagos, of course. I was in Beokuta, in Ibadan. So I know Nigeria. I know Nigeria the issues of elections in Nigeria. And I was observing the elections in Lagos when you had Tinubu and his other competitor. I was an observer of NDI-IRI team. So I know the challenges that Nigeria has faced in this period of democratization process. There have been gains and losses. I know the challenges you faced when Obasanjo, Atiku, then Yaradua, then Jonathan, and of course now the final one. You now have this phase here. So I know the challenges that have been here. I know there's some gains and losses. But what we want to say is that we should continue on the path of progress. I know that there have been mistakes which have been done, but we say we don't want to live in the past. We want to move in the future. We want to look at what is coming forward for the continent. So I want to say in conclusion that if the continent democrats, together with the international community of democracies, do not come together and defend the vote, the elections and democracy will be delegitimized in Africa with devastating consequences. As you face these elections next month, which is tomorrow's month, in February, we really want to urge Nigerians to stand firm and ensure that the voice of the people is respected. As they say in Latin, that vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. We want to wish Nigeria all the best in these forthcoming elections. Thank you very much for listening to me.